Welcome to You Asked For It, where you come up with the questions or topics, and we give our
come up with the answers.
We give our answers, our opinions, whatever it may entail. What we got for today?
Yeah. Okay. What does the Bible say about divorce?
It's bad.
Well,
Thanks for joining us.
See, and we'll see you next time we get a question.
More than one thing about divorce, and there's kind of a difference between Old Testament and New Testament when it comes to divorce. In the Old Testament, God allowed Moses, he said, he will allow divorce if you give a certificate of divorce to the person you're divorcing and let them know ahead of time you can get a divorce. Jesus was asked about that in the New Testament.
Which he referenced.
Yep, he did. And he said, why did you allow that? And he said, well, because of your rebelliousness. I said, listen.
Because you're sinful people.
Listen, you're so bad. I can't, okay, I gave you a little loophole there, okay? But I still wasn't for it.
Yeah.
So God is not for divorce. Old Testament, he allowed it. New Testament, he says it's just not good. As a matter of fact, I don't like when people quote this. It's where actually in the New Testament, a quote, God hates divorce. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things God hates, okay? But we just pull that one out because the word's used. God hates sin, okay? So God doesn't like divorce at all. Why? There's a myriad of reasons. But the number one reason is because marriage is like an example, a human example of God's relationship with the church. And you've done messages on it where, the two become one. And there's this unity, there's this commitment there that they work together, and there's an authority submission there for the sake of unity, getting along, for a family to have a purpose. So divorce is not a good thing. However, people still get a divorce. Is it the sin that you can't be forgiven for? No,
not at all.
Not at all. So some would say the Bible actually says that if you marry a divorced person, you are committing adultery. And I question that with the rest of your life. Is it constant? Is it, that's just kind of unclear. I think he's making the point that that person is still seen in God's eyes as united.
Tied to their previous spouse.
A piece of paper doesn't separate people in God's eyes. No, you were committed to one another. I want you to work on reconciliation. But once a person is done, Jesus said there's two reasons why we can move on from our spouse. There are two reasons Jesus gives. Number one, marital unfaithfulness, that if your spouse is unfaithful to your marriage, you can get a divorce. He says you are no longer held to that contract. And the other one is, if you are a Christian person and your spouse is not a Christian person and they choose to leave, let them go. There's nothing you can do there. You let them go. So I think there's, at least legally, there's two outs that Jesus himself said that you can get out of marriage for those two reasons. Other than that, God doesn't like it. He just don't. And if there's any way you can work it out, work it out. Do your best for it. It's going to be better for everybody if you do. Now, is there eternity? Is there, is it unforgivable, all that stuff? Clearly not. Clearly not. We all probably have known people that have been divorced. It's ugly. It's ugly. I'm going to throw something that's not in the Bible. It is in the Bible. You just can't find a verse for it. But it's something that Michelle Larson, who used to work here, said often. And she said, a broken home is horrible. We all seen broken homes are, especially if there's young kids. It is horrible to have a broken home. She says there's only one thing worse than a broken home, and that's living in one. And I am not a proponent of divorce. However, it's better. Nobody has to die here, okay? Get a divorce before somebody dies. It's not that crucial. So that's the answer, the biblical answer.
There's a multitude of wrongs in broken home or, abusive situations, whatever. Choose the one that's the less wrong of all of them. Yes.
God hates everything that's going on in your home.
Absolutely.
Okay? He's not going to hate a divorce more than he hates what's going on now. And so Christians sometimes tend to be a little narrow-minded with a scripture and not look at the whole picture. So sometimes Christians can be pretty abusive to other people, pretty controlling,
pretty condemning.
with just taking a verse out. God hates divorce. Yeah, we know. And he hates a lot of other things as well, you know. And so, no, divorce should never be what people look to do. It should not be the way out. But sometimes it's the only way to move forward, you know. So,
yeah, lots of things happen in our lives and in this world that are not God's best.
Yeah.
So
there's a question I ask you. I don't really do weddings anymore very much, but
yes, you do. That's a lie.
Usually when I'm talking to couples before they get married, I always ask each one of them this question: what's your deal breaker? And if they're not really Christians, they'll be honest. Usually Christians will say, nothing, we're in love forever. Yeah. Yeah. And so when they say nothing will ever separate. I said, so if your spouse cheats on you every day for 3.5 years, you know, that's not, you know, come on. Everybody has deal breakers. A gun to your head should be, if it's not a deal breaker, you need counseling. Okay.
Right.
But we all have deal breakers.
But Jesus didn't say a gun to my head was okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't one of his two.
That wasn't one of the things he specifically spelled out. This whole like divorce and marriage issue, though, number one, I know for sure non-Christians, they're not held to the same standards. Even Christians don't take the seriousness of marriage enough to begin with.
Yeah.
And going into it, and you and I have had plenty of conversations about like, listen, after your third date, start going to marriage counseling. Because any longer than that, now you got on, you know, rose-colored glasses and they could do no wrong. And
how about before you start dating? Know who you should be dating. You know, but anyway.
Maybe. So anyway, that's I mean, that's not what the question is about. We could do a whole thing on that, on this idea of marriage and what constitutes a biblical marriage. We've talked about before, like, is it a piece of paper? Is it a physical act that, you know, what is in God's sight, what makes two people married? But with the divorce side, what do you think about where Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, hey, listen, if you are divorced or if your spouse leaves, stay unmarried.
If you can. He also, if that whole segment where he's talking about all these different types of positions you could be in, you know, single, married, divorced, never married, he calls virgins, never married. You know, there's all kinds of things. He urges everybody to, hey, we all have different gifts, but if you can stay not married, you're going to be better off. I mean, really, he doesn't paint marriage like this horrible thing.
Do you think that's for everybody? Or do you think that's...
just for those who are kind of called to do that? He said, any Christian person, you can serve God more clearly if you're not married. You're not divided. Anybody married is divided.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm talking about where he says, listen, stay unmarried unless you burn with passion whatever sort of stuff. Then get married.
Yeah.
But I don't think, my opinion is, I don't think he's talking about divorced people there. I think he's talking about people who've never been married yet. Now, obviously, just like God doesn't like divorce, you know, he's against it. I think we take the Christians, take the divorce and then remarriage again too lightly. Again, a lot of things going on, a lot of others. So it's not, if you're divorced and get remarried, it's not the unforgivable sin.
Right.
But don't you think, based on Paul's writing, like it's almost one of those, we just ignore that section of teaching about like, listen, don't get remarried. Yeah. We know a piece of paper says you're divorced, but like you said, in God's sight, that's not nullified except for these couple clauses. And we just completely ignore it.
Is there always a chance for reconciliation?
Absolutely.
Well, if you get remarried, there isn't.
Well,
you know,
yeah.
It's done. So I think he means what he says, you know, to avoid getting remarried. I do think, just to answer two questions, I think whenever Paul addresses the unmarried, that could be divorced, or he always marries, he always calls virgins the ones that have never been married. And to the virgin, I say. But to the unmarried, that could be divorced most of the time, could be divorced, whatever. But here's the point. Yeah, don't get remarried if you don't have to. You know, now he says it's better to get remarried than to burn with lust. Now, come on. Remember we said God hates a lot of things? Which one's worse?
I'm going to have to read that section again. It's better to get remarried? I don't know if he says that. Does he say that? You guys talk amongst
better
yourselves.
To get married, but I think what he's talking about whenever he talks to the unmarried, I think he's talking about, he's not specifying the reason you're not married. To the unmarried. But he always says to the virgin, the one that's never been married. Because back then, if you weren't married, you were a virgin. That's how it worked. But anyway, your point.
I got to go back and reread that section.
It's best not to get remarried. And when Paul says it, I think he's speaking for God. And it's just better not to. Mm-hmm. Don't get remarried. And we know from God's perspective, he's right. He's always got the best. But just from our own view of life, we can see, I always suggest to people, urge them, if you're divorced and you have children, don't even think about your own romantic needs until your kids are grown and out of the house. Now, very few people do that. Very, very few. Mm-hmm. It's hard, right? But
yeah, I imagine.
Listen, your first commitment was to your spouse. That didn't work. Your second commitment's to your children. Mm-hmm. You don't put a spouse or a dating situation in front of that. Now, most people do, but do you know how damaging that is and how it's shirking our responsibility from God to raise our children first? And when they're adults, then, and I still don't know, if, like you said, if God would be okay with it or not, but to answer your question, absolutely, we as a culture do not take a lot of things in the Bible very seriously.
Oh, well, you know what? Let's just do the big umbrella picture then.
Now, God knows better than we do. It has nothing to do with going to heaven. It has nothing to do with being right with God.
Absolutely not.
Most of what God tells us has to do with our lives.
Yeah.
You know, quit hitting your head. Do not hit your head against a brick wall. Okay, God, I'll please you.
This is what I've always done.
You know, yeah, it's not about pleasing me. It's about, I love you. Don't do this.
Or even talk about verses Christians just totally ignore. Hey, God uses the apostles and prophets and pastors to equip God's people to do the ministry, to do the work. Like, we just oh, you do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's just fresh in your mind.
That's just fresh in my mind. There's a lot of stuff of like, why don't we do that? Why don't I do that one? Oh, well, never mind. Let's go back to why don't they do that?
Yeah.
The biggest one, we are saved to be with God. Well, let's do that. Let's actually be with God.
As long as I try.
I will when I die.
Real hard.
When I die, I'll be with God. That's what I was saying.
You will be, but gosh, wouldn't you rather have God's presence filling you now? All the promises in the Bible are from that. Mm-hmm. God's presence with us, in us, experiencing Him. We are way off topic.
All the promises to us.
To us.
Mm-hmm.
Not to the Jews.
No.
So divorce.
So divorce. Yeah.
If you can avoid it, avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you're getting the tar kicked out of you, don't stick around.
No, but that's not a license to get remarried.
But it also isn't a license to stay in that situation either.
No. And a lot of people, a lot of pastors I've heard would say they would encourage somebody or counsel somebody to separate, but never divorce.
Maybe. Who knows? Mm-hmm. I know I've done that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway.
All right.
Wow.
Here we are.
That was an easy answer.
Yeah. It only took us 25 minutes to get there.
There we go.
There we go. But we covered it. All right. Well, keep sending in stuff. You can comment on this video below if you have a question that you want us to answer, or you can contact us here at the church, and we'll see you again.